because someone says they don't believe in evolution. It's fair enough. But the reality is, I can tell stories about things. So, for example, when I the very first time I was going to be in a debate with the scientific creationist, a guy named Henry Morris, who was the grand old man of scientific creation in the United States, I realized I needed to learn something about fossils. I didn't know crap about fossils. And one of my paleontologist friends at Brown said, "When's the next time you go into D.C.?" Because at the time, I was on an NIH study section. I made 3 trips to Washington a year. And I said, next month. And they said, well, go down early in the day, and here's his name. Visit Porter Keir at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. Porter Keir turned out to be, he passed away a couple years ago, the world's foremost expert on sea urchin fossils. And I said, why do I give whatever about sea urchins? And his answer was because the fossil record of sea urchins is so complete, and they provide such a brilliant example of evolution. It's just amazing. So I went down to see Porter Keir and introduced myself, and he took me to the back rooms of the Smithsonian. And he said, I want you to guess how many sea urchin fossils I have. And I said, man, I don't know. You probably got a couple of hundred. And he laughed. I said, a couple of thousand? And he said, no, I have over 1 million. I said, how do you get 1 million fossils? Well, the answer, they're not all organized. Only about half are. He said, the beauty of sea urchins is when they die, they sediment. They go to the ocean bottom, and they're layered up. 100 million years later, Exxon comes along, drills for oil in the Gulf of Mexico, and they go down through the core samples. The core samples are filled with fossils. And as he joked with me, Exxon may not believe in ecology, but it does believe in evolution, because it needs to know which geological age the drill bit is in to know the probability of finding oil. So he said what they do is they sort these guys out by the bucketful, they label them, and they express them to me at the Smithsonian. I look at them, and then I tell them what geological age is in, and then I have 1,000 more specimens. So he has oil drilling companies all over collecting these for him. And then he's able to use these as research material. That's why he has so many. And he says, anybody who thinks that fossils are based on fragmentary evidence, the sea urchin fossils are beautifully preserved. You got the whole organism there. You can see where the spines went in and everything. And he goes through this huge specimen. He pulls out a drawer. There's 500 fossils in there. Another drawer, another 500, so forth and so on. This age, that age. Let me show you the evolutionary progressions. If you pick the right species, the fossil evidence for change over time is just so great and so overwhelming that it's just absolutely undeniable.
And that's what you use when someone says,
I would tell that story. The answer is yes, there are. There are holes in the fossil record, because the fossil record is an historical record. All historical records are incomplete. I'll give you an example. We're in Pennsylvania, not far from here, Battle of Gettysburg. Do we know who won the Battle of Gettysburg? Yeah, we do. The North won the Battle of Gettysburg, turning point in the Civil War. How many soldiers participated in it? About 45,000. 25,000 on the Union side, about 20,000 on the Confederate side. Do we know where every one of those soldiers was at every moment of the battle? Do we know when they fell or how? The answer is, of course not. We know some. A lot of guys kept diaries, but they didn't all. So the record of the Battle of Gettysburg is incomplete. Is what we do have, does it tell a consistent story of the ebb and flow of the 3 days of the battle? The answer is it certainly does. Books about it, movies about it, even though it's incomplete. Is the fossil record complete enough for us to understand the story, the ebb and flow, how things hit, even if there are missing pieces, just like we might not know what the 43rd Maine Regiment was doing at 2 o'clock in the afternoon the second day? The answer is yes, we can still tell. So that's how I would argue without audiovisuals. And the other thing is that there are examples of what I would call creationist deception that are very easy to explain. And one of the first time I was exposed to it was an argument saying that the Earth couldn't be more than 6,000 years old. And the argument was, if you take the strength of the Earth's magnetic field, which we can measure and have been able to measure for 150 years, it's been decreasing. It's weaker this year than it was 10 years ago, and weaker than it was 20 years ago. And if you take a chart going back to like 1850, The strength is on this axis. You see it curving like this, getting weaker, 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 weaker. If you take this backwards, it looks like an exponential curve. It looks like you extrapolate it back like this, and by the time you get to 6,000 or 7,000 years, that curve reaches infinity. That tells you the Earth couldn't be older than 6,000 years, because you couldn't have an infinite field strength. So there. Now, the first time I heard that from a creationist, I thought, wow, why didn't I know that? So I had no idea. So I then went to a professor of geology in my university, looked at it like this, and I said, here's the argument, what's the answer? He laughed at me. He laughed in my face. He says, how many degrees do you have? I said 2. I have bachelor's and a PhD. He said, both in science? Yeah. He says, I've always thought no one should be allowed to get a degree in biology without having at least one course in geology. You've never had a course in geology, have you?
No.
I said, no. He said, well, if you did, you would know that the Earth's magnetic field fluctuates, goes up and down. And, again, I'm being completely dumb. I'm going, you're kidding. And he said, yeah, that's right. With a period of about 1 million years, it reverses itself. And again, I'm still going, what? And I'm saying, do you mean if it's 1 million years ago, and I got my little Boy Scout Pathfinder compass, the needle's going to point to the South Pole instead of the North? You don't mean that, do you? And he goes, that's exactly what I mean. And what the creationists were doing, they knew full well that this is what the Earth's magnetic field did. They were willing to take a little bit of it, show you that it's going down, hope that you as a biologist didn't know enough geology to know what they were really doing, and willfully to mislead you. That's not the way that any reasonable person makes an argument. So again, that's an example of deception. And the final thing is I hear from people all the time, well, you're a scientist, you're a member of the scientific establishment, you can't contradict Darwin, because then you lose your position, you wouldn't get tenure, you wouldn't get any grants and so forth. My answer is, do you have any idea what scientists dream about? We don't dream about confirming existing theories. You think I can publish a paper by saying existing theory confirmed? Who gives a shit? We dream of overturning existing theories. That's how you make a reputation. Yeah. So the notion that research that was contradictory to existing theory would somehow be shunned or regarded as unimportant, that's completely bogus. Science celebrates the guy who can break things apart.
Absolutely. How would you be